Hello, welcome everybody. Welcome to Holistic Approaches to Supporting Tenants and People Experiencing Homelessness. I've moderated a lot today, and I've only just now realized that I've never introduced myself, so thank you for allowing me to introduce myself for the first time moderating. My name is Floriane, and I'm always start by saying bonjour, by saying hi. We're in Montreal. I think most people know those. I also want to say sego, which is a Kanengyahaga greeting. So to start, I want to acknowledge that we're on the land called Jogjagge in the Kanengyahaga language and Munyang in Anishinaabemowin. The island has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among many First Nations, including the Kanengyahaga of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, Huron-Wendat, Abenaki, and Anishinaabeg. That being said, I'm going to pass it off to Dylan for the first presentation.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. What a pleasure to be here. My name is Dylan. I am a registered social worker. I've been working in Ontario for about 20 years. 15 of those years I worked in a human shelter. About half of those years specifically with survivors of human trafficking, sexual exploitation, and forced marriage. And about 5 years ago, I segued from human sheltering into animal sheltering. And so that is what I'm here to share with you today, is a little bit about that work. But before I go any further, I just sort of wanted to acknowledge that having worked in the shelter space, I worked in a shelter that welcomed animals. We were animal inclusive, and we ended up, I think, not necessarily understanding what we were endeavoring. We had rats in kangaroo pockets. We had skunks jumping out of hoodies in our drop-in. We had ducks under beds in our shelter. It got wild real fast. But it was important to the organization to say, this is family for our clients. And my experiences there, I really think about them with such heartfelt warmth, because it really was the difference for some of our young people to be able to come inside or not. I share a little bit about who I am because I have worked in the shelter system. I've also worked in private practice. I do equine facilitated psychotherapy and specializes in EMDR as well, employing horses as therapeutic partners. My lived experience is that animals have been transformational in my life. When I was a young person, I exhibited mental health symptomology. I didn't know what was happening for me, but what I knew was that there was an absence of symptomology when I was in the presence of animals. What I then came to know is that through my professional lens, that animals were really the foundational piece of consistency, connection, and meaning for a lot of young people, and oftentimes the longest standing relationship and the only safe one that they have ever had. And so this is really what brought me to sort of segue into moving into what we call veterinary social work, or social work in animal care spaces. I am a little tech, I don't know. I don't even know what to say, but not good at it, for lack of a better word. How do I make that big and that small? Thanks already for being so generous with me.
Let's see if I can.
Yeah.
Is that better?
And that. Okay, perfect.
All good.
Thank you. Okay, perfect. All right, so what are we going to do today? Today I am going to hopefully share a little bit about the human-animal bond. We're going to talk about why I encourage or invite you to consider animals as members of your clients' families if you're not already. I'm going to share a little bit of tools or techniques that I might recommend in terms of implementing some action if you already are, or if you're thinking about starting to do some of this work, and then have a couple of exercises for you. We're going to go pretty fast today, unlike the Blue Jays game on Monday. Hopefully we're going to have a few runs, we're going to get some Springer dingers, and then we're going to take it home before Ohtani can get on the base again. So we're going to wrap up quick. Do I have a Blue Jays audience today? I hope so. Yes! Oh, I feel at home. I was presenting last week and none of my jokes landed. It was terrible. Okay, so to begin with, what I want to share with you is that all of the photos that you will see, except for the photo that was on the cover screen, are photos of animals that are owned and or in partnership with somebody that is living outside. They are animals that we have supported at Toronto Humane Society in some way, whether that's veterinary care, whether that's grooming, whether that's behavioral training support, whether that is helping them sort of figure out what's getting in the way of interrupting that safe comfort bond for them. And so as I come to all of these slides, I'm really going to ask you, just take a moment and just have a quick reflection. What do you notice in the animals that are on the screen? What do you notice about their coats? What do you notice about their demeanors, their temperaments, their breeds perhaps? And so I'll just ask you to just take that quick moment and just have a glance. Okay. So I'm going to share with you very quickly a very, very brief history lesson of human-animal bonding. Many cultures and civilizations have revered animals. We know that in ancient India that there is a tremendous amount of moral respect and acknowledgement for a lot of our feline and canine friends. We also know that in ancient Egypt, for example, animals were really revered, and that there was a real expectation that they were very godly-like, right? And that there was an expectation that they would be honored and respected. One of the things that we talk about at Toronto Humane Society is when we're doing our land acknowledgement, we're also being super mindful of the impact of colonialism on animal landforms as well. That we know that colonialism has brought a host of different animals to Turtle Island or North America, animals that were never here before. And what that meant is that there was mass extinction and endangerment of species that were here. We know that the entire continent had been dismantled, that we've lost land, that there is a huge shift in our relationship with animals, as well as a loss of ecological knowledge related to indigenous connection with animal species. And so one of the things that we know is while there's a ton of cultures and civilizations that have revered animals and elevated and honored and respected, unfortunately, Judeo-Christian cultures actually traditionally dismissed the needs and the rights of animals. With the advent of Darwin, we know that continued to sort of forge the domination of humans over animals, and that this really dominated the sort of philosophical understanding of a settler movement in North America. That was until about the 1800s, and we started to see a shift on our continent. In the 1800s in Canada, we actually started to get an animal welfare movement and a cruelty act that came into place. In 1887, actually just prior to that, there was a gentleman named John J. Kelso, and he immigrated with his family from Ireland to Toronto. This individual grew up in abject poverty in Toronto and really started to take a step back and observe that there was a host of different animals, as well as children that were living on the streets of Toronto that had zero protection and in fact were experiencing extreme degrees of exploitation. What he did at that time is write what would be equivalent to like a blog today or a vlog. And that movement started a donation. He got a $2 donation and he started what is now known as the Toronto Humane Society. At that time, Toronto Humane Society, that was 1887. So we're coming up on 100 and I can't even do the math, 70 years or so of being in existence, right? But what was happening at Toronto Humane Society was that he was not only caring just for animals, but care was also being provided to unaccompanied minors. John J. Kelso, after 2 years, then departed Toronto Humane Society and started the Children's Aid Society of Toronto, which started the Children's Aid movement in Ontario and across our country. While we know that there are atrocities that have happened in both of those systems and they continue to exist today, I think what's really powerful and pivotal about that is that at the original hub and the starting place of animal welfare was that integration, that we need to care about all beings to be able to bring the best health well-being for the individuals, whether that is four-legged or two-legged, as well as community safety. And you can see on the screen some of the original General Humane Society Association, some of the objectives that are originally started, and you can see stopping cruelty to children was one of the first ones. The idea of thinking to put humane literature into schools and homes, recognizing that if we can stimulate empathy and compassion in relation to the human-animal relationship, that will have profound psychological, emotional, and psychological impacts for everyone in our community. What then happened is sort of we had those siloing those two systems, but what we're really encouraging and inspiring and seeing happen more and more is the reintegration, right? Is thinking about full family planning and recognizing that that doesn't just mean the human species, but that also includes non-human species. So human-animal relationships have evolved significantly. We know in Canada we have approximately 28 million pets. That is in comparison to approximately 11 million children. So there are way more pets in our communities than there are actually children. And we know in North America that it's more likely that children will grow up without a biological father, but they will grow up with a pet. We know that we spend more money on pet food than we do on baby food, which is pretty astounding. We know that children are deeply impacted by their relationships with animals. We know from research that often children are learning the names of their pet after their primary caregiver, right after mom or dad or whoever they identify. They're learning that pet. And it's probably impossible to find a book, a TV show, or a movie that is children related that doesn't feature or center animals, right? So depending on our age or our generation, it might be The Jungle Book, it might be Bambi, it might be Old Yeller. Anybody that probably has kids these days, it's like Paw Patrol everywhere. You can't get away from that. Baby Shark, all that stuff, right? And so we know that the connection between children and animals is really profound and really formed at that point in time. And we also know, in addition to that, that children are observing how people in their family are treating the animal species that are in their lives. And they're also often experiencing their first moment of grief and loss when that animal passes. And so what is that messaging, right? In terms of how we say goodbye and what death is in our families. We know that there is a whole phenomenon of pet parents in the world now. We celebrate birthdays. We dress our pets up in clothing. Some of us might be dressing our pets up for Halloween. My corgi is going to be a banana. My corgi is named Stuart, so if you can guess, I am childless because I have a corgi who will be a banana, and for Halloween he's going to be a banana. But anyway, we have these whole phenomenons that are really happening that's really, really super interesting, right? But the question is why? Why do we care about animals in our community by large in North America? Well, the question is, well, science says that there are physical, emotional, psychological, and social benefits. And what's really interesting is when we think about reducing the us and them that's happening in our spheres, our clients love animals just as we love animals, right? Or they have relationships or they have foundational ideas about how to engage in the world with animals, just as all of us do. We know that there is tremendous amount of research attached to how animals can increase the likelihood that we can feel connected and safe in relationship, that it can reduce loneliness, feelings of isolation. We know that when you get a dog particularly, that there's tons of research that will increase our physiological health, right? Attachment to routine and structure, that desire to get out of bed, the amount of clients that you probably have had, and I know I certainly had, that said if it wasn't for my animal, I wouldn't be alive, right? Those are real powerful connections that our clients have and that we have, because quite frankly, some of our animals have saved our lives. That's just the reality of it. So when we think about the fact that we all need mentors, we all need on that, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we need social connection. So do our clients, and sometimes it's not through humans. So what we're talking about is the human-animal bond. And essentially the bond is a deeply intertwined relationship that's mutually beneficial for both sides. I'm going to share this little video because I think it's really funny, and I hope you laugh. Oh no, won't it play? Oh, what a bummer. Rattlesnakes. Okay, now I'm going all over the place. It was embedded, I promise. Oh, has anybody seen this video before? It's so funny. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, this is just a picture.
On the other one, it was embedded when I sent it through them. Oh, there.
Discover
I can't see it. There is a cat one. Are we dog people? Are we cat people? Are we no animal? Dog? Cat? Other species? Yeah? All? None. Okay. Okay, it's always good to know your audience. There is, okay, so if it, I don't know if it,
Discover.
there is a cat video too for people that are.
Discover relief.
I don't think I cannot pull full screen.
That's okay.
on
That's
this.
perfect.
Yeah, okay.
From fatigue, depression, and stress. Discover Dog. Prescription strength Dog is the non-harmful treatment that is shown to lower blood pressure and risk of heart disease, prevent allergies in children, reduce stress levels, decrease anxiety and depression, strengthen your immune system, and increase social interaction. Side effects may include talking in ridiculous dog voices, picking up poop, making funny faces, being jealous of your dog kissing other people, pretending your dog has a job and has to pay rent, excessive social media posts, laying on the floor pretending to die to see if your dog comes to help you, having full-on discussions with your dog, feeling guilty if you don't tell your dog you love them before you leave the house, saying bless you when your dog sneezes, calling your dog by names other than its actual name, congratulating your dog's bowel movements. Discover better health. Ask your veterinarian about dog.
That was worth it, right? Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So anyway, kind of it lifts the mood a little bit, but brings a little bit of levity to it, right? So now that I have made connection with you, and you all adore me because of the information I'm giving you, now I want to ask you to do something. I want to ask you to care about pets in the work that you're doing. If you already are, thank you. If you are thinking about it, thank you. If you are concerned and worried, totally fair and reasonable. Animals can be messy, they can be complicated, they can come with a whole host of biorisk security measure concerns, training and safety issues, etc. But we can help you with those things. Again, just take a quick moment and have a glance at our beautiful friends here. Okay. Again, I've been really nice and I'm going to be a little bit harsh. Here's the reality. If your clients have animals or care about clients, whether you like animals or care about them, it is an obligation that we care about them. We have to care about the things that our clients care about. Otherwise, we're inadvertently creating a bit of a barrier to engagement with them, right? We're not seeing them for the entities and the fullness of who they are. You know, the reality is that whether we want to, I'm encouraging you or inviting you to think about it as a challenge if you have some reservations. The other thing is that animals can actually be a carrot. They may actually make your work easier if you can connect on that level. If you care about the thing they care about, which might be an animal, this may form relationship faster and create trust. What I want to say really quickly is there's a couple of different experiences that we know that animals can both be health promoting as well as barriers to care. We know that approximately 1 in 10 vulnerably housed people in our country are pet owners. We also know that through research that attachment for individuals that are experiencing transitions or experiences related to precarious housing, that it is much more likely that their attachment to their animals is much more strongly firm, established than even my own. We know that individuals that are experiencing transition and challenge, that might be the consistent stabilizing factor for them, right? We know that they might have compromised their own health, their own well-being, their own financial circumstances for that being to continue to be in their life. And so they are going to hang on to that animal and prioritize and continue to elevate that animal. We know also that animals can pose a barrier to our services. So if we are inadvertently positioning our clients to find somewhere for their animal to be, to provide services to them, what kind of dynamics are we inadvertently positioning them to have to navigate before they ever get to us? We also know that there's a huge epidemic of gender-based violence. I know a lot of cities across our country have declared it an epidemic. What we also know is, has anybody heard of the violence link before, by way of hands? The violence link is essentially, since the 14th century, there's been a recognition that if there is violence happening in a home, it is very likely that that violence is not happening to only one species. There's a high propensity that if there is violence in a home happening to an animal, it is much more likely that it's also happening to other members of that family, particularly if they're children and or elders. What we also know is that it's a high propensity that if there is an animal that is experiencing deprivation or neglect of care, intentionally, they might also be a precursor to violence happening to the other members of the family. So they might actually be an indicator that something in addition to that violence may come next. So it's really important that we start to pay attention to what are the species in the animals, how are they presenting, what do they look like, what is their coat like, etc., because it can give you some indication as to what else might be happening in that home. We know that these are Canadian stats. 89% of women that entered the VAW shelters in Saskatchewan reported animal maltreatment also occurred. 71% of perpetrators threatened, harmed, or even killed the animal of those women that were living in that home. We know that children are at increased risk because oftentimes children will put themselves between a perpetrator and the animal in an effort to save that animal. We know 56% of women identified delaying leaving the home environment because they didn't have anywhere safe for their animal to go, and we know approximately a third of them actually did go back to the environment because their animal was left in the perpetrator's hands. What I want to say is that delay in leaving is not because of ambivalence, it's really about moral responsibility, right? Really, really important to underlay. So if you walk away with anything from this, I hope that you will walk away thinking, what are the other species in this family telling us, right? If there is something that is happening that appears to be coercive or controlled, a lot of times perpetrators will use an animal as a real intense measure of control or manipulation, right? We know the power wheel. There is a power wheel attached to animal violence as well. So denying medical care, perhaps injuring an animal and then refusing to be able to take it to the vet, for refusing to be able to feed it, water it, do whatever it needs to do. There's a whole dearth of research attached to that. The other thing that I want to pay attention to as well is that we have an aging population. Oftentimes our seniors have senior animals. Senior animals often have increased medical needs. They may or may not be able to meet those needs, whether there's mobility issues, cognitive issues, financial issues, things of that nature. So then you've got somebody at your home that has their own concerns, right? And then their animal is also perhaps experiencing difficulties. Oftentimes when we see neglect attached to animal care, it is very much in conjunction with self-neglect of the client themselves. We also know that there's a huge correlate between animal hoarding populations, primarily being elder women. Animal hoarding, unfortunately, is an egregious act for the animal, of cruelty for animals, because you have an overburdened caregiver that has a whole host of animals living in one space that are continuing to breed. Most of them are intact, and it results in a whole host of concerns. We see them a lot at Toronto Humane Society, where we unfortunately have to engage in quite a few amputations, sometimes enucleation, where you're removing the eyes because of the conditions that are happening in those spaces. Sorry, I know that was a cringy one. So why am I telling you this? The reality is that our pet families will more often than not compromise their own self, their own well-being. They'll compromise their own resources. So we give them all these resources. We connect them with the food bank. Are they going to use those resources, or are they going to give that food to their animal? Our pet food bank at Toronto Humane Society is not uncommon that individuals will choose to come to get their pet food before they'll compromise not going to their own human food bank, which may or may not have pet food. But we also know our pet food bank is no barrier, open 7 days a week. And so some of our clients are consuming the pet food themselves because they are not able to access sufficient supplies elsewhere. We know that people will stay in dangerous situations, whether that is violence or whether that is living in stairwells, right? They will live outside in conditions that are uninhabitable if their animal doesn't have somewhere safe to go. What is happening is that they are sometimes also forced to surrender their animal and sever that bond, which is heartbreaking, of course, both for the person and for the animal that loves them and loves them dearly. The other thing that we're seeing a lot in veterinary medicine is economic euthanasia, so animals being euthanized only because there are not sufficient resources to care for a healthy young animal. As I stated earlier, not only do I argue that we need to ask and care about pets, but pets can actually help you do your job. Pets actually have a way of being able to break down our natural defense systems, right? Anybody have an animal? You have animals on your phone. You have pictures on your phone. If you want to show them to me, I'm happy to see them. But your clients would be the same, right? You ask a question about their animal, damn, they're going to tell you about it, right? So, you know, when we have clients that are particularly stressed or traumatized based on our own systems, or fearful, or they've learned these mechanisms that help them and protect them, this may be something that they want to talk about. They might actually take you up on that care that you can offer if you can meet a need for their animal, the thing that they care the most about. We know that also we're going to find out really interesting information about their attachment. We know that attachment theory doesn't just apply to humans, it applies to animals as well. And so if we think about how does this person attach to this animal, what were the perspectives of animals in the homes that they grew up in? Is there a dearth of connection that's attached to their animal? What does that tell us about their propensity to be able to find and secure connections that are meaningful to them, right? And so we can learn a ton about their view on life and where resources have been helpful and where there's an absence of resources. And finally, we know that they can be health promoting or barriers to well-being. So let's just take another moment and let's have a peek at these little faces. Look at that little white guy. I have no idea what that breed is. That's wild. Okay, I'll take it. So we've highlighted some of the reasons that I employ you to consider animals as members of your client's world, and we're going to give you a couple of little tips real quick, because I don't know what my timing is like. Perfect, thank you, I was looking for you. Okay, on a micro level, there's several key actions that you may consider employing in the work that you're doing. First and foremost, I would consider, or I would employ you to consider increasing your own knowledge of understanding the human-animal bond, the violence link, grief as it pertains to loss of an animal. Some of your clients might have experienced multiple experiences of grief, and better bet that they are grieving those animals that they have lost as well, whether that's through death or whether that's through surrender. We know in our communities that a lot of times animals are also stolen, right? And so what is that grief? Are we acknowledging that grief that that person is enduring, that their family member is no longer their family member, and how deeply is that hitting them, right? Also legislation. So are you familiar with your municipal bylaws, but also the provincial legislation? I'll give you some examples. In Toronto, for example, there are bylaws that indicate how many of each species you can have. You can have up to 6 cats. You can have up to 3 dogs. You can have up to 30 pigeons. More if it's breeding season. So just things to sort of familiarize yourself. But what you also want to know is how can we help prevent clients from being in jeopardy of being fined by the city if they're not abiding by leash laws, right, or muzzle laws. In Ontario, we also have breed-specific legislation that says that you cannot have specific breeds in our province. Quebec does as well, but not all provinces do. So if your clients are having particular breeds, are they inadvertently positioning themselves to be in real harm's way if that animal hurts somebody? Do they know that even, right? The other thing that I would employ you and consider to do is think about your own personal assumptions about how you feel about animals and what your relationships are with animals. I should have put a disclaimer at the beginning that I am an animal person, and so this is going to be inherently incredibly biased. But anyway, just thinking about sort of what assumptions you have about animals. The other thing that I've found in shelters is that a lot of us are animal lovers that work in shelters. Sometimes our biases mean that we can create positive associations with our clients. Are we connecting more with clients that happen to have animals because we love their animals, so by proxy we like them? Alternatively, do we have assumptions? Remember in the beginning I talked a little bit about colonialism and the impact. Actually, I don't know if I mentioned this, but we know that colonialism has had a major impact on the Western ideas of husbandry, how an animal should be looked after or cared for. What is the suitable number of dog beds that we should have in our home, for example? The answer, in my opinion, is every room, and the dog will choose to lay on the couch, choose to lay on the floor, regardless of how many dog beds you have. But anyway, thinking about your own personal biases or assumptions about what animal care looks like, right? And are we putting that on our clients or not? So thinking about sort of where our gaps might be. Considering spaces that you might, whether or not you can invite animals into your space, there might be other ways that you can consider engaging your clients who have animals, whether that's thinking about your intake forms, your safety planning forms. I would encourage you, if you're doing safety planning related to violence, consider those animals, right? What are the things that they deem unacceptable for their animals, right? Also thinking about suicide risk assessment. Are animals included in that or not, right? So what elevates somebody's concerns related to suicidality? It may or may not involve an animal. Often it does. We see that a lot. Clients that are presenting to surrender their animal to our shelter. When social work is engaged and some probing happens, what we find out is that this is actually the person relinquishing the most valuable being in their life before they move towards the next step of not being on this planet any longer. And then, can your clients that might be animal inclined, can we engage animals on some front? Can you have a fish tank somewhere? Can you give them videos of animals to look at? Can you engage them if they have access to therapeutic supports? Would they be keen to engage in having an animal with them, or a St. John visiting dog, or things of that nature? I have a bunch of questions here, and you will have access to my slides. They're just some pivotal points that you might want to consider asking. So, does somebody have a pet currently or in the past? Maybe they don't have one now, but maybe they've before, and maybe that's what they want to talk to you about. What kinds of needs does your pet have? How can we best assist them with their animal? Has their pet ever been prevented from accessing supports or services that they've wanted to access? And how does their pet help them? That can really illuminate some really interesting things about their own values and what's really important to them. On the right-hand side, I've also provided some safety and well-being questions that you might consider. What I would say about all of these questions is they're not, like everything, not checkboxes, so they're living questions. We want to continue to ask these questions as we continue to develop relationships with our clients and as they navigate shifts and changes in their lives, right? One thing to know is if there's violence, in homes, we want to be really, really mindful about microchips. We want to be mindful about any names that are on vet records, things of that nature. I can talk to you about that stuff at another time if that's applicable for your space. Are there other ways that you can support your clients? Can you invite pet food into your food bank? We have a free sign up for anybody. You have to be able to pick up the food, so hopefully regionally in Ontario anyway. We'll provide you all the food, all the supplies, the crates, the kennels, the muzzles, everything that you need to be able to support your clients. There's a lot of food banks across our country that have pet food banks as well. Pet supplies, low-cost medical care. What might surprise you is that there is no subsidized veterinary care that does not exist in our country. So finding or forging relationships with private veterinarians that might be able to support your clients or might have funds that would be able to support your clients, or starting extra funds with your private donors to be able to provide those really important medical care pieces to prevent future illnesses, but also there's going to be emergencies. There's always accidents, right? Grooming, we know that approximately 40% of population is unable to access grooming that their animal needs. What happens, it might seem like a nicety, but for some breeds, when they get matting, their whole body mats. That becomes a welfare issue when mobility is challenged, right? And then also consider including having an emergency pet care plan. You can see one on the right-hand side. You're welcome to take a picture of the QR code, or I can share it with you another time. But essentially, it's creating just like an emergency care for your client, having one for their animal. They will have an emergency at some point. Where is that animal going to go if they go to the hospital or something of that nature, detention or wherever? In the interest of time, I'm going to skip over this, but if you are a shelter, a residential space, or things of that nature, there's a host of different ways that you can invite animals in, whether that's them having them in their room, or whether that's having, designated kennel space somewhere else off-site, or whether that is employing a short-term pet safekeeping program. We run one at Toronto Humane Society where we bring animals in for up to 6 months, and place them into a foster home. When things have stabilized, if and when things are more stable, pet goes home, everybody's happy, everybody cries. It's wonderful and beautiful. Okay, one more moment just to see these sweet little babies. Okay. Take a quick moment and just have a peek at this pup. Think about sort of any thoughts, beliefs, assumptions that might come up about this animal. Where do your thoughts go when you see this photo? What we talk about a lot is how important animals are to people. These animals need their people so badly. We have a huge overpopulation issue in our country. We have an we don't have enough veterinarians or medical staff to be able to care for the animals that we have. If we can work together, cross-sectoral, to be able to keep animals with the people that love them and with the keep the animals in homes where they love their people, we're all going to create improved well-being in our spaces. I'm going to sign off in one moment, but before I do, I promise you that I would give you, I think like a prize or something if you were able to share observations of the animals that I shared with you, the photos that we kind of took a moment to look at. Keep in mind, I'm a social worker. I'm a social worker in an animal welfare shelter, so budget, what's that? But if anybody wants to just shout out anything that you noticed in the animals, the photos, happy, healthy, diversity in breed, diversity in age, right? Really healthy coats, seemingly to be really calm, content animals, right? I share that with you because this is the reality. Just as diverse as our clients are, their animals are as well. I said I would give prizes. The prize, my friends, it was a trick. The prize, my friend, was that by sharing those photos with you, research says that that is giving your nervous system a rest. We know that that will give you a moment, a glimmer, a smile, a smirk. It will illuminate just moments of gentleness within yourself. I do have some prizes for people if you'd like them. I do want to just say very quickly, we have the International Association of Veterinary Social Workers. We are social workers that work at the intersection of the human-animal bond. Please consider there's information on your table. Feel free to take a photo of our QR code if you want to learn more about us. We are going to have a summit in 2026 in Toronto. It's going to be the first international summit. But also we do a ton of work at Toronto Humane Society consulting with organizations that are interested in working with pets and their owners. So if I can help you in any kind of way, please reach out. Thank you. My co-presenter is so generous. I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry I went over. And she's like, you did great. So you're so kind. You're so kind.
Generous.
I sometimes get going and then I,
Okay, let's see. This
ooh.
one, perfect. All right, let me.
While we're doing this, people want pens or sticky notes?
Are you okay with this view?
That's
Yeah.
perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Here. Oh, so sorry. And please welcome Nicole Aylward.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me? Yeah, I'm not used to needing a mic. I'm pretty loud, so. But if I do talk too fast, which if they keep up with you, I think they'll be okay. You're quick? You're quick? Anyway, I'm really excited to be here because I talk about this all the time, and now I have a whole fresh new people to talk about it with, so I'm really excited. Today is helping each other out of a rut. So as the title suggests, it's kind of interactive and you have to help me because you all came here. And that's what you signed up to do. And the door is closed too, so you can't even leave. First of all, who I am. That's me without glasses. It's me. I have 20 years in experience in the field, 5 years working with my current organization in Homelessness St. John's, 16 years working in corrections as well, and I have a real focus on housing stability, crisis response, and how the two, justice and housing, kind of intersect is where I'm pretty passionate about. I just want to take a second to acknowledge that Newfoundland is home to a really diverse Indigenous population, which comes into play a little bit later. But we're also really pretty. In Homelessness St. John's is the system planning entity in our urban center, St. John's in Newfoundland. And we work together with all our stakeholders to create a city where everybody has a place to call home. So today's session goals kind of outlined up here. But what I first want to say is that while I'm drawing on a lot of my own experience and things that I've interacted with, I'm also pulling a lot of my data from other research teams and regions that have done a lot of work on this issue. And my goal here today is to have a really great dialogue with everybody in the room to talk about how the commonalities of how we see unit takeovers interact across the country. And I'll give you all the things that I have learned, and then as a result, we'll pull our stuff together and we'll kind of make a common framework to move forward so that you can take back as much as you can to keep the education going, to spread it out as far as we can. Sound good? Okay. I know we're getting down to the end of the day. All right. First of all, what is a rut? I have to give a shout out to my coworker back in Newfoundland, Sherwin. He coined the term that we use all the time as rut, and it's basically a residential unit takeover. We love the term rut because anyone can find themselves in a rut, you know? It's not big and scary, and if you can, anyone can end up in a rut. Anyone can get out of a rut, right? We've all been in ruts before, and you can get out, so it doesn't seem so unmanageable. But basically, it's a situation where an at-risk tenant is forced to accommodate an unwanted visitor. In this presentation, I refer to them as a housing predator, but I'll get into that a little bit later. And it's basically a very mutual relationship in the beginning. And it's important to remember that ruts kind of start really slow and build gradually for folks. The key to understanding a rut is that no matter how it started, it results in the client being really scared and nervous. It's fear-based at the end. Doesn't matter if it started reciprocal, doesn't matter who it is, doesn't matter the relationship. You've gotten to a point now where it's the client has lost control and there's fear. And that is really the defining element in any kind of rut. If you're not sure, if the client is afraid, it's a rut. And I find myself having to explain this all the time is our clients are really, really, really vulnerable. They're vulnerable because they rely on the systems for their basic needs. They're not all presenting as you would the typical vulnerable client. We aren't serving Oliver Twist, but they are really vulnerable. And at times, they have to engage with other people in the community to get their needs met as well. And while ruts do occur anywhere in private housing, they occur most often, to no surprise, in social housing, 86%. What are the different kinds of ruts? First one is a drug-related takeover. It's gang or individually perpetrated. I think this is self-explanatory. I work in the housing field, obviously, with folks in private market, and we had a co-housing arrangement where we had some guest management issues. And when we went in, it became very evident that there was a local drug dealer that lived a couple of doors up, and our clients had some substance use disorder, and they would come on down, and they would, give everybody a bump, and then they would do their business all day long out of their unit. And our clients were really kind of powerless and very scared to say no, and it resulted in a lot of damage, and it resulted in a lot of fear and a lot of shame because they did open the door on the first time for this client to come. The other type of residential takeover is from the formerly homeless. Sometimes I feel like people don't talk enough about it, but when people become homeless, they don't just lose their home, right? They lose so much. But when they exit homelessness, they also lose so much. They lose their community, they lose their routine, they lose their favorite worker, they lose the spaces that are familiar to them, they lose the neighborhoods that are familiar to them. And so it really can be isolating to get a house, right? And sometimes we're like, oh, I'll give you a house, you're good, yay. And people are like, ugh. But then it's really hard too to say, I don't want any of those familiar things to come back into my life, right? I'm there all night long by myself. I'm nervous. I'm scared. And so they're inviting people that they've met back into their homes. The other thing, I had a client, and he was fun. He was very fun. He had a pet, and it took us a long time to kind of find him somewhere to live. And we finally got him in. We were all so excited. It was high fives. And then we just continuously were having all these peaceful enjoyment concerns. We were having all these damages. There was all these parties. And I was continuously saying to him, you've got to get your guest management under control. Like I was the concierge at the hotel, get your guest management. Anyway, finally one day I got really frustrated. And I was like, what are you doing here? And he was like, these are my friends. I can't just watch them out in the rain. I can't leave them out there. I'm trying to end homelessness. And I was like, I'm trying to end homelessness. So, but again, how do you look out the window and see someone? There's also a lot of survivor guilt when you come out of homelessness, right? We don't talk about that very much either. Not to be flippant, but I think we all seen Little Orphan Annie when she gets chosen, just plucked out. Like, why me? Why am I so lucky and everybody else is back? The system is really random sometimes, and you kind of feel like, I have this, but nobody else does. Do I deserve it? What if I lose it? What happens if I end up back out with my friends? Well, this person shared their cot with me or their locker with me, and now I have all this space and I can't share it. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on, and I think there's a lot of reasons why this could happen. The other one that we see a lot is the takeover of elderly adults. We see a lot of kids being released from institutions or experiencing homelessness or having financial distress and ending up back living with their parents and then taking it over. Again, this isn't just people who are moving back with their parents. It's when fear becomes involved. And then the smallest category is just anybody else who kind of fits in there. So there's two types of perpetrators for ruts. the first one here is vulnerable population, and that's where we're going to spend a lot of our time today. The other one is the business, and that's the gangs and stuff. And like, you know, while I'm very brave and think I can do everything, I probably can't solve that all on my own. And I think it's no surprise why we're here. Tons of housing pressures, right? People who had their own space and there was lots of spaces and you could pop around and move around and, you know, get into the private market or get into social housing, everything has become a lot tighter and there's a lot more pressure. And not everybody has their own space to do their business or to live with. And, you know, for the first time ever, you're having to choose to leave people that you had behind in shelters and stuff. This is the profile of folks who are most at risk. Like that's everybody we work with, right? That's everybody. I thought it was very interesting. And you can see this one is from the Crime Prevention, Ottawa 2013. I will put the links at the end, I forgot to mention. Some really good resources there. Sometimes I find myself in rooms where I have to convince the people why they should care about my clients, and I know this is not that room. You all guys showed up because you care, but I did want to give you a little bit of that information in case you do find yourself going back to your own communities and having to convince people of why we should care about this particular topic. So first is the individual harms or impacts. Ooh, that black is hard to see, hey? All right. Loss of housing, obviously, criminal charges, tons of violence. There's a huge financial cost. A lot of times the perpetrator is, you know, taking your bus pass, taking your food, taking what you have. They know when check day is. They know when your benefits come in. They don't have some of the things, they're taking yours. A ton of theft, abuse and safety issues. People are really scared and they're using their strength to make sure you're quiet. A ton of exploitation. All of which are associated with serious mental and physical impacts, right? So that's why we should care on a very individual level. However, overall, the community should care. So if you ever get the opportunity to get in front of your municipality, this is why they should care. There's a higher neighborhood violence and criminalization, like we talked about when those gangs move in and take over, or where people are selling a lot of drugs in your space. It's hard. Ruts are often associated with co-occurring dangerous, disorderly, and noisy conduct. Mental health problems in the area are generally exacerbated when there's higher levels of antisocial behavior, right? It becomes a scary neighborhood. And then overall system impacts. There's a ton of extra pressure on correctional housing and healthcare systems. There's an increase in bylaw enforcement, noise, overcrowding, property damage, property devaluation due to crime. Damages in the area affect local business and communities. Ruts are often committed by individuals avoiding the justice system. So all these things play out really big. A few things to consider. First and foremost, you know, we do this work because we care, and housing predators are often appropriate targets for our social interventions, right? The best way to solve a rut is to take the individual who is hanging about and refusing to leave and give them a space of their own, right? If you can do that, that's solving the whole problem, right? Engage the clients, engage the perpetrator. And the rut crisis is not a result of poor boundaries on your client. Blaming someone for their own suffering doesn't do anything, right? And by putting the blame on your client, it really distracts from what's happening from the perpetrator. It's really a systematic failure. Lack of affordable housing, bad shelter, overcrowding, drug stigma, out of jail with no discharge planning, mental health vulnerabilities, criminalization of sex work. And it's a really interesting one because it is mutually beneficial, right? It starts off like that. So sometimes it is really easy to kind of blame your client, like I was saying, just be guest management, stop them, don't let them in, you know? We had to really consider all sides of it, I think. The other thing I wanted to talk about in particular is individualist cultures versus collective cultures. And a lot of what we have in North America is an individualized culture where you're taught to just be very independent, protect yourself, live alone, be self-sustaining, right? That's the narrative. That's what everyone is trying to do. But a lot of our, Canada's a real melting pot. A lot of cultures are collectivist cultures, where you're expected to take care of your family. You're expected to take care of your cousins. And the vast majority of Indigenous cultures are very collectivist. You'd see somewhere in the middle would be like the Irish, the Italian, folks who also really prioritize family. So it's important if you go in somewhere and you see a ton of people, it is necessarily a rut. And it's also important to consider that, again, once fear enters in, that's what we're talking about. Overcrowding is overcrowding, and that might be beneficial to your client. It might be great to have. I've got 31 first cousins. Like, it might be great to have them all around. It's really when folks are bringing trouble to your location that's the concern. Identifying ruts. No surprise here. The easiest way to identify a rut is through victim disclosure. Like, that's like anything, right? But obviously, it's not really easy to get anyone to identify. And let's talk about that. Like, what are some reasons why people would not just self-identify? Oh, someone's in my house and won't leave, right? Like, it sounds really easy to say, I really would like this person to go and they won't leave. Can you help me with that? But in a lot of small towns, even in big cities, a lot of our perpetrators and victims are using the same resources and the same services, right? They're all at the same local food bank. They're all at the same soup kitchen. They're all at the same clinic. They're all at the same pharmacy. Potentially, they're going to end up in the same jail at some point. And so it's the fear and control really enters into every single aspect of their life. And it isn't as easy as just moving them out of the house, right? It generally impacts them in a very, very, very big way. And, I go home at 5 p.m., right? They have to spend the entire night. Oh, that was romantic. Neighbors and friends are really helpful, obviously. People around know the property. They're there 24 hours a day. They know the victim. They know what's happening. They're also really nervous to often say, which you can imagine, if there was a little bit of a gang situation happening next door to you, you'd be a little bit hesitant to talk yourself, right? Like, it's understandable. There's obviously a lot of control happening, so there is a real fear, shame, and a lot of loyalty too, like, especially elders. Like, it's really hard to say, I've lost control of my housing situation. Like, to have your own house, get your own homestead, to be having it, to maintain it for so long and then say all of a sudden, I've lost control here. There's a lot of shame in that. And you're probably outing someone who was at one point helping you. So it's just really complex. The best way to respond for a rot is, it just needs to be a really holistic approach. So residential unit takeovers, whatever way you slice it, is a criminal matter. If a guest is unwanted and will not leave, that's criminal. However, I don't know what your experience, but just because something is a crime does not necessarily mean it's best solved by the police, Sometimes, someone said, okay, I've got some friends. It needs to be, like, everybody needs to be involved in this. Neighbors, community supports, landlords, social workers, municipalities, bylaws. The police have a role for sure to play in here, friends and family. The community has to work together with the victim. And it's really and really, really important to support those who report. I've talked a ton about how shameful it is, how scary it is, how it permeates into every part of your life. And I think it's really, really important to support those folks. No different than domestic violence or interpartner violence, right? It's really scary. The other thing is, if these are service users, it's really important to let the other service providers in your area know what is happening in that particular unit, because they need to go in with their eyes open and be mindful of what they're saying as well. Always use confidentiality and care. You have to build trust, right? They have to trust you in order to figure out what is the best way for you. Well, how can we do this best? For our program, sometimes when they've disclosed, they'll say, can you come and put a fake warning on our door and say, oh, there's no more guests allowed? Absolutely, love to do that. Happy to be the bad person in that, Sometimes we'll give fake eviction letters. Sometimes we'll ask people to say, I'm just not safe here. Like the individual he was like, I'm ending homelessness. My friends are out there. I'm going to bring them in. It was very evident to us pretty quickly on that this individual would not be successful housed in that particular area, in that particular space, because it was kind of on a thoroughfare for some supports. And so he was just constantly going to be bombarded with folks who were going to be coming, and it was going to be impossible for him to say no. So working with him, and he was like, I really don't think I can stay here. I need to find somewhere different, off the beaten path, and then maybe I will be able to protect my space a little better. The best way to provide intervention for folks is checking in. We just say, just make it a little uncomfortable for the perpetrator. Just constantly go by, like I'm the most annoying human being ever. Just popping by. Oh, I got a bus pass. Oh, forgot the other one. Now I have to pee. Oh, I was in the area. You know, I got a Tim Hortons card. Oh, what's happening? I saw this shirt. Is it yours? You know, like I'm just always annoying, and that bothers people. The other thing is I'm wandering around. I'm very nosy. Like I'm poking around. I have found people in the weirdest places, like in closets. I'm like, oh, look at this space. What's in here? You know, or behind doors, behind curtains, under beds, you know. You'll find people who are hiding. And the more nosy I am, the less onus it is on the individual to kind of point them out. They know I'm going to pee and can be very nosy, right? Which is helpful. If you can, increase security measures. I mean, we don't all have the luxury of installing security cameras. But sometimes the police, if you engage your police and you have a good relationship, which we have a great relationship with, I'll sometimes say, hey, I've seen so-and-so around that property a lot. And then, you know, there's been some noise complaints. They might drive around a little extra. Or they might say, oh, okay, well, if we get anything in the area, we'll pop by. Or we'll keep it in mind, right? And then usually engage with the client and ask for a plan of action. How do you want it to look? How do you want me to speak to you? How do you want me to show up? How do you want warnings? Sometimes for us, if we're giving a warning letter or an eviction letter or, you know, an eviction prevention support plan, or we're engaging and leaving a note, we do it very discreetly because we don't want the whole neighborhood to know, oh, hey, you did something that we're not super pleased about. But if you have a rut, you might want everyone to know that because you don't want people coming and going, right? And you'd be like, oh, man, you can't come over, they're watching the place, right? So you'd be very public about it. So a lot of collaboration happens for us. The other thing we do is we change the locks a lot. And then if you need to, you can relocate the victim. But again, like I talked about, it has to be somewhere where that works for them. It's no point in moving them from place to place if they're continuously on a thoroughfare where they have to go. Or, you know, you're moving them to the next neighborhood where X number of people live and they'll be found out pretty quickly. No shock. The best way to prevent a rot the best way to end the rot is to prevent a rot, like anything else, right? Get ahead of it. When you see these things happening really early, have really early intervention and really early conversations. A lot of the literature talked about plans, crisis plans, what happens if, who are the people, what are you going to do, how do you say no, how do you want me to show up, what are the conversations you want me to have with people, what can I do to help you, right? Prevent that, plan for it. We always ask, like, what happened to your last housing breakdown? And sometimes they'll disclose, oh, well, you know, my son, he came, he was very noisy, I had parties, my friends, we ended up peaceful enjoyment. That to me is a red flag. Okay, well, how are we going to prepare for that going forward, right? I just love this slide because I love a home visit. Again, I'm just super nosy. Just always in poking around, right? So the benefit, you know, you go in and you see like 4 pairs of men's work boots and it's a young girl who lives there. You're like, what's happening here, you know? Or you see tons of garbage that, you know, it's like, seems to be more than one person hanging around here, right? Or sometimes you'll go in and you'll see the couch is always constantly made up, right? And like you're like, who's in the bedroom? Who's sleeping in there? If there's someone always on the couch, like what's happening with that? So you can just learn a lot from those things. And just be nosy, always. In every part of your life, just be nosy. So the whole goal of this session for me was to kind of give everybody here the information that I kind of learned from reading and my own experience. And then to take all that information, there's a ton of recommendations from all the literature, to kind of streamline that into a really cute acronym, because I love letters that come together and make words. It's exciting for me. I very rarely get them right, but I do like them. And then you can kind of take it back to your own towns and your own programs and maybe carry forward with it that way. So the first one was a study. It's a bit of a wordy slide, I know, but just take a picture if you want to. But study ruts. Measure the prevalence of ruts in your area. Map them out. Figure out where the hot spots are. Figure out why those are the hot spots. Bring it to your municipalities. Can we change those? Let service providers know in your area where you're really prone to home takeovers. Maybe don't house folks in those hotbed spots. Facilitate community consultations. Learn. Ask other people, because while we have our finger on the pulse of lots of different areas where people might be able to disclose and stuff, there are tons of other places that you don't see. A lot of those seniors are hidden, right? Those are hidden ruts. And then analyze the stakeholder experience. Next is create. No, it's innovate. I was playing with 2 different words, sorry. Develop a structured framework for identifying ruts. And I have one a couple of slides down. examine the barriers of law enforcement. One of the most frustrating things for me ever was sitting in the room with the police and being like, we got all this information for you, you're going to love it. And they were like, okay, that's not really our problem. That's a residential tenancy problem. And I was like, no, it's not. That's your problem. And he was like, no, that's, So understand the barriers. And they basically said, like, unless someone's prepared to say, hey, this person refuses to leave me alone, I want them out. And then all they'll do is take them out and put them on the sidewalk and say, okay, now they're out. And that's not really solving anything. So understanding the barriers of where the law ends and where the Residential Tenancy Act begins and what the overlap is. And then analyze systematic variables contributing to those concentrations. There's a ton of systematic problems here that create these ruts, right? Again, the pathway to and from supports, housing conditions, social housing is usually lots of ruts happen those. So if you understand all that, then you can create a plan. Share your data with policymakers. Once you've studied it all, once you've collected it all, once you've curated all those resources, then you take it and tell it to as many people as you possibly can. Tell. And once everyone is aware of it, then they'll even start to become common language. People will understand what it is. You can ask people then. If you ask someone out there in a rut, they'll be like, oh, I don't know, I'm feeling kind of bad, but I'm not too bad. You start getting the language up so you can have those conversations. Even the perpetrators might not even know what it is they're doing. Maybe they're just used to it, right? But the more you're talking about it, the more you're having that shared language, the more you're sharing all your information, the better it is for everybody involved. And always include people with lived experience. Because I think I know everything, but their perspective is the most important. And then identify your community circle of care. Develop an integrated advocacy council, create a dedicated helpline, which is I would love to do that, but that's a bigger one. And include people with lived experience. Again, when you're doing all this education, make sure that people with lived experience are the ones who are giving the education to people, right? So this is where I wanted to have a little bit of time today. I wanted to collaborate and I wanted to get started. So if you'll indulge me, remember I said you had to help me? Remember that was in the title? So I didn't trick you. You knew what you were coming for. So the very first thing that we had to do was kind of study and learn. So if you could QR code this, I hope to God there is a survey on the other end of it that will take you 3.5 minutes to do. And do we have time? How are we doing? Yep, I got time. And then if we do that, we'll have all this experience in the room and all those answers. And then if you were to share it with just 2 of your coworkers, that would triple all of our survey answers. And then I promise at the end of this, I'm going to give you where to find all the data once I'll get somebody else to analyze it, but they'll put it up somewhere. Do we have a survey? Yes, okay. I came last year and the survey QR code didn't work. How we doing? Everyone's busy reading. All right, so I see most people seem to have at least found the survey, which I'm very pleased with. I was so proud of myself for getting that figured out. I'm a talker, not a tech person. All right, so what do we think? Are we able to take a picture and show it to a few colleagues or coworkers maybe around? Am I asking too much? No, someone said no. Someone over here said they definitely would. You think we can do it? Yes? All right, I promise I'll share all of the information with you folks, and then you can have it to share with all your policymakers and all the people back in your area. All right, I promise. So here is the checklist that we talked about. Remember it said create a framework to identify ruts. If they didn't self-disclose, maybe what a rut would be. Sometimes I've used this to sit down with someone and I've said, do you think you might have a takeover? And they're like, no. And I'm like, oh, well, let's just go through this. And they're like, oh, yeah. And I'm like, that's not normal. That's not okay. That's not what you need to be in. You know, we can help you with that. So this is one for service providers. So obviously increase people coming and going, increase cars or bikes, people entering or exiting the property, abnormal increased presence of people at the property, excessive complaints lobbied against the property. And then changes in the behavior. Sometimes you might not see a lot of people coming and going. Maybe it's just one person who's taken over, right? And they're being really controlling and really demanding and they're really nervous, scared of that person. Maybe the tenant hasn't been seen recently. One of the things, if you have a unit takeover, you don't want that person going out and talking to their service provider, their supports. Maybe you won't see them very often, right? I know I had one person present at a clinic. We have an outreach team at a clinic, great partnership. And they presented and said, the only way I could get out today was because I thought I had a very bad head cold. And I'm here today, but I normally don't have my bus pass, nor they hold it, right? Unexplained new money, clothes, or cell phones. Maybe you see all this money around, right? A lot of texts or calls, relationships with controlling other individuals or groups, gang association, isolation from social networks, self-harm, changes in emotional well-being. It's really stressful to live in that 24 hours a day. Unexplained injuries, physical appearance deteriorated. And then changes in their access to services. Not checking in as routinely. Maybe someone's normally at the soup kitchen 5 days a week and all of a sudden you don't see them there at all. That would be a big indicator something's going on. Be a little curious. Remember I said be nosy? Always be nosy. All right? Curious, sorry, my Newfoundland it's curious. They're telling me to correct myself, yeah. Sometimes we get reports that say someone has checked into shelter, but they have a house. That's a little curious. It's a little curious. It's a little curious. Pardon? No. So that's the checklist that we've developed, or that at Homelessness, but we've used a lot of the framework from the other 3 big areas that we pulled a lot of our data from. So I just wanted to give those resources because they're fantastic. The Grey Bruce Health Unit, anyone from that area here? No? They've got some really great resources you could model off and take. They're really good. And that's probably the most recent. The Dream Team is also fantastic, and the Ottawa region as well. Really good stuff. So I encourage you to read those guys. And then a big thank you. Thanks in advance for sharing that survey with all the people and talking about it over supper and sharing it with all your friends. And then when you get back home, emailing it to everybody else. Big thanks for that. And then I think we're at a Q&A. Yeah, all right, thank you.
Awesome. Exactly. We're at the Q&A. There's a microphone in the middle. Feel free to come up and ask your questions for both. Et si vous avez des questions en français, vous pouvez les poser aussi. Je vais juste m'occuper de faire la traduction. Et c'est ça.
Pens?
We've also got pens and sticky notes.
If no question.
You ask the question, you get a pen.
Yeah.
Oh, do you mind? Can I bring you the microphone? No, because it's being recorded and for the translation. So, sorry.
So I'm a community developer and I work for Ottawa Salis, and we are partners in an Ottawa community housing building, so OCH, which is houses, there's so many of them, and there's about 250 tenants. And this is a really big thing. This is happening so much. And I guess I firstly want to say there is so much stigma around this topic, and like everything else, I feel like it's one of the biggest barriers to help the person who is staying or taking over a unit. And it really affects the individual in the community when the unit takeover is happening. And I guess it's like, I would like to know how to help the community view the situation and the person not as an enemy, because what's happening is the tenant, the community member, is so vulnerable, is facing, in our situation, oftentimes I know of 10 right now off the top of my head, and most likely those folks need tons of supports, and the people with them also need so much supports, and often they're homeless. But not only that, now the person is targeted in this large community, and it's further isolating. And so in these large buildings, there's such stigma. So that's something I really want to talk about. But also, how do you help this situation when there's all these systems that are not working together to help that individual and the other individuals who are honestly suffering? Most of these folks are suffering. And I find the lack of collaboration or even knowledge or best practice. So I'm not sure if you could speak to that. It's such a big question, I know.
No, I think that you hit the nail on the head there in terms of the stigma, because it just seems like, why can't you just ask them to leave? And you're bringing the people, and it's your fault. And there becomes a lot of blame and the mob mentality around it a little bit. Again, I just talk. I'm a talker. I talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. Anyone who will listen to me, I talk about it. I talk about why they might possibly let somebody in. I talk about how scared they might possibly be. I might talk about all the needs that they don't get met. I might talk about how little money they actually have to buy food. I might talk about how sad it is to be alone when you've never really been alone. You've been living in shelters for the last 3 years. I might talk about the types of food that people might bring with you and how difficult it is for substance abuse. I put posters up around. Yeah, and the Grey Bruce has a fantastic one. It's what is a unit takeover and what's a guest, and it's a little checklist, and I think it will just build a little bit of empathy in the average person to see. One of the recommendations was to build a task force or a committee, and we've got a great partnership with the Residential Tenancies board in our area, the municipality, and the RNC, and we've had a couple of meetings where we sit around and talk about it and just normalize it, and we have some meetings with supervisors in the area for folks that are supervising housing support workers, and we talk about the hot spots, and we map out which houses, and we have a little bit of a network to let people know when there is a vulnerability or when there's a potential unit takeover. And by doing that, we're streamlining all the resources in our community. We're streamlining and getting on the same page with the same language and the same understanding and the same empathy. And I think that is really big. The cross collaboration for me is where it's at, because you're right, the systems don't necessarily work together really well, right? The RTA is like, oh, well, we'll just evict them. Like, that's horrible. That's not what you want. No wonder you wouldn't say anything. You're going to lose your house. And then the RTA is like, the police are like, I don't really know. So just talking about it and seeing what piece of the puzzle each person can bring and have an understanding. Like maybe the police will go somewhere and they'll recognize that there's a rot happening, and they might reach out to us and see who is it we can help and what can we do. And they can use that language with the client and say, well, maybe pop on down to one of these resources in your community and have that conversation. And it really starts when the tenant himself are ready to say, I need to get some help. I need to get out of this situation. And can you help my friend? Or could you move them along? And I think that, again, just awareness. It's a hard one. It's tough.
Hi, my name is Angela, and I work with Manitoba Housing. And this is absolutely a topic that resonates. We own a lot of properties, and in certain neighborhoods, unit takeover is a very serious issue. So my question is, how do you navigate what I kind of consider the gray area between tenant rights and rights for tenants to have guests, and protecting clients, protecting the humans that are vulnerable and sometimes need intervention to stay safe. So I'll just mention a method that we're experimenting with is, in very specific situations, can we have a guest list? So kind of straddling the sides of, well, tenants can still have guests. There are those rights, right? And they can, write a list of 3 or 4, whatever it is. But then also, if that unwanted guest appears, the landlord is the bad guy, right? So that kind of absolves the tenant of that personal guilt. But it does kind of toe the line on the whole, tenant rights versus, overstepping what a landlord could or should do. So I'm just wondering, in your context, how do you navigate that area?
That's a great question. We do kind of a similar thing. Early on, we learned quite quickly that you can't be the support and be the landlord. Like, you can't be the enforcer and the supporter. Like, it's just really hard and murky for folks, even though sometimes you're tasked with doing that particular job, right? So we always, one of the programs that I work with is Home Connect, and we work as a kind of a bridge between the landlord and the supports. And we meet with the landlord and kind of talk to the landlord and see what the issues are. And then we'll issue a warning, and basically, like, you've got too many guests, or your guests are too loud, or there's problematic behaviors. I'm a really big, firm believer that people are entitled to the information, and they're entitled to know, and they're entitled to know the impact that that's having on everybody else in the space and in the building. It's a little restorative justice there in terms of saying, like, what are your thoughts about this? Like, do you realize that so-and-so is coming and knocking on the window at 4 o'clock in the morning, or they're hitting every button on the thing to get in, or they're being very loud and chaotic in the space? Do you realize that? And do you realize the impact? And then people have the right to choose, right? Maybe you're in a situation right now where you're unable to say no to the individual and they are impacting your housing, but that's a consequence of the situation that you're in. And while it's really difficult and really hard, I think that's part of the journey, and you can't take away the consequences from people either, right? You can work with them. You can give them all the warnings. You can give them all the space and all the empathy and all the kindness. At the end of the day, maybe that's not the housing situation that will work for you. Maybe you need to go to a supportive housing so that you're safer. Right? Maybe where you are is not where it's working, and that's okay. It's it's devastating for us. It's devastating, but maybe it's okay. You know, you can't expect someone to do something that they just can't do for whatever particular reason it is.
I might have a question for you, Dylan. I don't have my notes, so let me know if I'm not asking like the right question. But you mentioned how there aren't any subsidized veterinary programs. Do you know of any like other countries that do, or like examples that could be looked to?
To the mic. Yes. So I should have rephrased, I think, what I said. So there are no socially provided veterinary services. There are a number of clinics similar to our clinic that offer subsidized care. So our veterinary program is a social enterprise model, for example, so that we can provide reduced care. So I just wanted to clarify that piece. No, I don't know. So veterinarians are private either corporations or private business individuals, right? That's how clinics run. So that means that either the corporation that is operating will set the fee guide, or that clinic will set the fee guide. What is oftentimes underappreciated is how expensive it is to be a veterinarian. So oftentimes our veterinarians are coming out of colleges of vet med with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. So oftentimes there's sort of a misunderstanding there as well about their price structure, and sort of some villainization that can sort of happen, but they go into the field for the same reasons that we all do in terms of wanting to be able to provide the best care to that animal. So there is no model that's currently existing, that there's a lot of models that I'm aware of. There's ways that we're sort of trying to come up with creative solutions of doing that, or making it more accessible, but it would be wonderful. We continue to sort of enlist municipal and other levels of government to sort of consider this. There is some organizations that are starting in insurance to include pet care and insurance. Those wouldn't necessarily always be for our clients necessarily, but there's sort of some ways that corporations or businesses are trying to get creative about providing care. Yeah.
Got it.
It's difficult. It's difficult. We're doing a lot. There's a lot more mobile services too that are going into encampment spaces. We work with our local shelters, and we'll come in and just do, vaccinations and behavioral training and all of those kinds of things. So in your own communities, reach out to your organizations because they might be able to provide those same services. Whether you come to them, whether they go to you, there might be ways that we can make sure, because there are zoonotic diseases that transfer between humans and animals that we want to be mindful of. And just like our care, if we can provide prevention, like vaccines or flea, tick, heartworm medications, we can prevent a whole host of other issues. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. That was a really good answer.
Okay, thanks.
And we do still have 5 minutes for questions too. Feel free to come up to the mic en français aussi, si jamais vous voulez. Oh, can you?
So I do know, like on this topic, it's probably the biggest thing that exists for me when I'm supporting someone with an animal is they don't have money to literally help the animal. And I know it's a gap and there's no quick solution there, but as a person supporting that person, what do I do? Because, there's like the Farley Mowat, which is so specific and almost nobody really does that. Yeah. There are some clinics, but truthfully, there's so much wait list for most of those clinics. And like I would see, an animal like suffering, and the human is suffering right along with that animal. So it's like, as a worker, you kind of feel super helpless in that. And I think it's really frequent. I think it's a huge issue, actually. Like socially, in an Ottawa, like in that housing I'm talking about, there might be like 20 animals that would need care. And here, like in Ottawa, we do have, I can't remember what the community clinic is called, but we do have some great things. But again, there's a wait list. So what could we do as a worker supporting that individual and their pet? When when they can't pay.
Yeah,
And this is the honestness of it.
Oh, 100%. It's really tricky because I think we need multiple things to happen at the same time, right? So we need to sort of address that micro level. What are we going to do with that client that's in front of us? And then we also need to sort of look at other sectors, right? So how are we inviting in our veterinary community? How are we inviting in our private sector community to sort of recognize that this is actually a community health issue? This is a public health issue. This isn't an individual and their animal issue. This is about community safety and public health, because if animals are ill, that can have dire consequences for other animals, for people, and for the environment because of the transmissibility of disease, right? So if we take it from a different lens, which is, we know it's about the bond, but it is also about things that are wider, right? Then we can come at it from a different lens. I would say, for example, Ottawa Humane Society, reach out to your regional humane societies or OSPCAs. In the animal welfare sector, there's a huge recognition of the access to care barriers that exist. We know that there are veterinary deserts. We know that there's not enough veterinarians. So people that even have money aren't able to afford, right? The cost of care has gone through the roof. We know that there's been a 300% increase in the cost of pet food, for example. So there's a huge recognition in the field itself, and so there's a lot of movement to be able to try to recognize how is the animal welfare industry going to address this barrier as well. And part of the work that we're trying to do is trying to say, oh my gosh, you guys already have the relationship with the people. What do your people need? We have the veterinarians have the expertise in medicine, the behavior experts, because the other thing is sometimes animals are healthy and well, but do they know how to behave in an elevator? Or is your client going to get evicted because their animal is unruly or is, moving around the space if there's bites, things of that nature? So sort of also looking at the importance, like behavior is as important as medicine, is a lens that we take from an animal care lens, right? So how can we sort of amalgamate all of these spaces? It's not a perfect answer, but I would really encourage you, because the animal welfare industry completely understands. This is not foreign to them. And I would say from a social worker coming to animal welfare, I've actually had easier reception moving into that space where they're saying like, yes, we want to work with social services. Social workers have been a harder sell, I'll be honest, right? Because you all are stretched so much. So for me to actually say, hey, care about something else that's living and breathing, you're like, oh my God, there's cultural concerns, there's safety concerns, you're all working on, trying to rub a penny out of nowhere. I appreciate all that. But our sectors can come together and the appetite is ripe, like the time is now. I can connect you with Ottawa Humane if you need a specific connection, yeah. The other thing is just to also harness yourself with information related to what the cruelty laws are. It's really, really important that you do. What does neglect and cruelty look like in your community? Because you can harness your clients with that as well, right? Inadvertently, we may or may not be participating in neglect and cruelty by absence of engagement. And so where do sort of our regulatory bodies fall on that as well? The only other thing that I'll say is if your clients do have neglect concerns or things of that nature, veterinarians do have an obligation in their code to report your client. So I would highly encourage you to go with your client, to advocate for them, to explain that, the overmatting or the nail growth or, not addressing allergic skin disease or not addressing, ear infections that's resulted in deafness or things like that nature, that you can help paint the story so that there's a better understanding so that they're not inadvertently getting in.
We have one more question. Oh, sorry. No, were you still? No. Yeah, go ahead.
I got caught in the hallway life, but I don't know if this was asked, so I apologize if it was. But what is your experience with clients transitioning from like a emergency shelter setting into, let's say, transitional housing, and they're asking to get a new pet? I feel like this is a little different than what you were talking about, and we've had that come up in some of the programs that I'm in. And I forgot to say, I'm Retta Parnas, and I'm here with the Life Skills Program for Projet Autochtone du Québec in Montreal. And so we have had people advocate for themselves, like these would be the benefits of me being able to add a pet to my life here in transitional housing. And so far we've had to say no. So I'm curious if you have had success stories or tips around that. Because they might not know how to take care of it.
Oh, absolutely, right? It's sort of for some of us that are owners or have grown up with animals, it feels like second nature, but sometimes I forget that I didn't know how to tie my shoe at some point, right? Like we have to learn these things. They're not intuitive necessarily, right? So I think, if there's appetite, how can we help? Well, one thing I think is you can set your own policies, right? Your policy might be you can come in with an animal. I've seen lots of places that say you can come in with an animal, but you can't acquire new animals when you're there. Right? I think people need to sort of think about what your objectives are of your program and whether that's supportive of that or whether helping them, create when you're living in your own space, how can we get you prepared for that? Can we start to, purchase the supplies at this time so it's not one big, budget for it, that kind of thing. Exactly. I think the other thing too is that if there's, you can also, if there's issues, mobility issues, you can look at like how, are the local SPCAs or things of that nature, do they do dog walking programs? If they have a cat, can you get an automatic litter cleaner? If they have, mobility issues, having to clean the litter, things like that. There's other helpful supplies that can make it possible. But if you have concerns, if somebody will maybe forget to clean the litter or forget to feed their animal because of neurological concerns or things like that, there's different supplies that you can put in place to make sure that they're able to engage with the animal, but the animal is not going to go without. Yeah, happy to chat more about your specific organization, because the other thing is when you get a lot of animals in one space, particularly dogs, we help do consultation for like walk routes so dogs aren't meeting face to face, which can be upsetting for them or things of nature.
Thank you so much. Thank you again, presenters, and also the audience. I totally encourage you all to connect, and see y'all tomorrow.